Yeah,
Yay!
What is up, everybody? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 229.
We're getting up there.
Yeah, we are. Very excited about tonight's episode. Our guest, who could not join us last week due to an accident on the road. She lives in a small mountain town. It's a beautiful small mountain town. But when things happen in town, it usually affects everybody. And unfortunately, an accident knocked over a power pole, which knocked out the internet. She wasn't able to join us because there was no way of getting in touch with her. But she has managed to make things happen this week. She's coming to us live from a truck because she is literally on the road like 90% of the time. Our guest tonight is a race director, an ultra runner, an FKT, a new one, an FKT holder, and a podium finisher at the Teanaway 100. We're going to talk to her about that, the very recent race that just took place. Candice Burt is joining us on the show tonight. I'm excited about this.
We have people in the chat room that are so excited about this. They're tuning in live at SeaTac whilst waiting for their bags.
Good use of the word whilst. But also, I love that we have airport travelers. I'm sorry that you're having to wait. Luckily, it's at SeaTac, which isn't the worst airport to wait at, but hopefully you get to catch the whole show, or hopefully your flight comes. Regardless, welcome everyone to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 229, featuring our guest, Candice Burt. We are about ready to get started, so let's do this. Let's go. Ginger Runner. Yay! What is up, everybody? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 229. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy Mondays to spend a little of it with us tonight. We have a wonderful guest on the show tonight. She is a race director, directs some of the biggest races, ultra marathons out there, including 200 milers. She's the one that coined that new hashtag, which is 200 is the new 100, which I read and go, no, it's not. No, please.
Just like the panic sweats.
The panic sweats. My palms are already sweaty. She's a fantastic race director. We got a chance to run one of her races this year on Orcas Island. Really well put together event. Beautiful place. Of course, all of her races take place in gorgeous parts of the Pacific Northwest and Utah and California, all over. Candice Burt will be joining us on the show to talk about what it's like to be a race director, direct the races that she does, as well as run ultras, because she's a seasoned professional ultra runner and FKT holder.
FKTs.
Yeah, she's pretty badass.
Does it all. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome to have her on the show tonight. Before we introduce her, of course, we have a couple of individuals to thank. First and foremost, our Patreon supporters, those who support us at $1 or above or whatever, every month in and month out. You guys are the reason that we are able to do this show. Monthly live shows for them, as well as a weekly podcast for everyone here. Ginger Runner Live, we do reviews, we do movies, films, everything here on the channel, and it is all because of the Patreon support. So if you haven't, consider joining. It's very simple. Just go to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. 3 individuals in particular at that top tier we like to mention at the top of every Ginger Runner Live episode, because they are really the people behind the scenes that do help make this happen. Chris Lee. Out of Hong Kong, Chris owns an organization there called Trailblazer. They showcase all the incredible trails that Hong Kong has to offer. He's a wonderful human, a really seasoned trail runner, hiker himself. He's been doing some pretty big events, and he's got some good events coming up this fall, including the Can Run. If you find yourself in Hong Kong, you're going to want to participate in that event. It looks amazing, beautiful trails, everything like that. So Chris, big shout out to that man. Rick Bjarnason and his team at cheekymonkeymedia.ca. They're a web design company. They design all sorts of websites, including the new gingerrunner.com website, which is coming. I gave them a list of like little detailed things, and they're cranking through the little fixes, and soon gingerrunner.com will be nice and updated, fancy and new. Rick himself is an ultra runner, Sinister 7 this year, Fat Dog 120, which unfortunately was canceled this year. But he basically picks the hardest races and trains for them, and he's a seasoned ultra runner himself. And finally, in the chat room tonight and every Monday, he's a wonderful human being, Brian Sands. It's his birthday. Happy birthday to Brian Sands. He ran his first marathon last year after losing 100 pounds. He's well into his journey now, more than 100 pounds, but he ran his first marathon last October, then ran his first 50K this summer, training currently for his second 50K and first 50 miler. He is proof that we can do it. He's an amazing human. We're excited to have him on the Patreon side of things. So big happy birthday and a shout out to Mr. Brian Sands. Okay. Kim is also here.
I was going to say, before we get into it, because I think the show is going to be like pretty amazing. As always, you guys, we are live. We have Candice with us live. So if you guys have questions for Candice, please pop them into the chat room. We'll be pulling them throughout the hour.
It's part of what sets this show apart is this live factor. So if you have questions for Candice, drop them in there. Kim has been already pulling a bunch of sides, so we'll get to those as often throughout the main show and definitely in the post show. But
there's a lot of people in there that have run one of Candice's races or want to run one of Candice's races.
Yeah, let us know as we as we talk to Candice. We'd love to get people shout outs who have run her races or signed up, that sort of thing. So without further ado, badass race director, ultra runner, FKT holder, Candice Burt.
Yay!
Hey guys.
First of all,
thanks for having me on.
It's awesome to have you on. It's long overdue.
Yes.
One thing I pointed out when we first Skyped here, just got connected. I was like, man, you look like you're in a fighter, like you're a fighter pilot in the cabin of a jet or something. Where are you? Where are you coming to us from?
I'm near Monroe, which is on the west side of the mountains, but I was heading back home, which is Leavenworth now, Leavenworth, Washington, a small mountain town. Like you mentioned earlier, it's really small, so the internet doesn't work very well at my house. It probably works better here on my phone than it would work on my internet connection at home. It's horrible.
We love Leavenworth. Every time we go there, we're like, we just want to live here. So, I mean, it's nestled in the huge mountains and stuff like that. But I imagine small town living, has that drawn you in, or do you prefer, I guess you travel a lot, or do you prefer like bigger cities, you know, since you do get to see a little bit of everything?
I prefer smaller. There's a train. By the way, if you can hear it. I prefer smaller towns for sure. Although, I mean, it's great to go to a big town and have great restaurants and, you know, great healthcare and all that kind of stuff. There's definitely things I miss out on living where I live. But because I travel, I can get a lot of stuff that I need when I'm out and about. So when I get home, I make sure I have everything I need there or mailed to my house. It's pretty hard to get stuff.
Yeah, there's a part of me that loves the city living where if you order something online or if you need something,
you get it like same day
delivery. I don't know what I would do without that.
But we're also very much like, we want to be out of the city.
We want to be out of, we have that same mindset. So we're kind of jealous of the Leavenworth living because it's a beautiful area too. Kim.
Yeah, and speaking of being out of the city, we have a question from Tim in the chat room. And Tim asked, Candice, now that you're living where you are, have you had any cool wildlife encounters?
Actually, not where I live. Although I had somebody visiting my house while I was gone, and she photographed a mountain lion sitting in my front yard. So that was pretty cool.
All right.
Yeah, I didn't get to see it, but there are bears that come. I have a stream that goes to the back of my property, and there's apparently bears. I haven't seen them yet, but I have 3 dogs, so I'm afraid they might scare some of the wildlife away from my house, that is.
I am glad that we haven't received photos of mountain lions in our front yard. There are certain individuals, yourself included, that'll be like, oh, I'm sad that I missed out on that cool sighting. There's also people like me who are like, I'm glad I didn't get eaten.
I'm glad you visited while I was away.
While I was away. So let's get into this. First of all, let's talk about being a race director, because I know you've been doing it now for a number of years, but one, what got you into it? Why did you decide to become a race director? There's obviously a lot of races out there, a lot of very seasoned race directors that put on events and stuff like that. What drew you into it, and what helps set your events apart? And we'll talk about the evolution next, but I'm just curious, what kind of got you started in it?
Well, I've always been really obsessed about running for some reason. I can't explain, but even back in high school, I would go to cross country practice, and then I would come home and I would run even more. And so I knew I loved running, but I didn't ever think, you know, it would be some sort of career. So I got into massage therapy. And while I was doing that, I got into ultras. And I love them so much. I ended up helping out quite a bit with volunteering. And then I worked for Rain Shadow Running for 3 years. And that really got me interested in the management of it, because I had a lot of responsibility within that organization, and both in executing it like on site and organizing it behind the scenes. And I started to think like, I'm sort of good at this, and you come up with ideas, you start coming up with routes you want to do. So I just, while I was working for Rain Shadow, I created a series in Bellingham. It was shorter. It was like 10, 20K, that kind of distance. And then I just sort of leapt into the 200-mile distance. I think because it was definitely a scary thing to do, to just be like, well, I'm going to do a 200. But I think that there was some drive behind it to create something that hadn't been done. And at that point, I had been organizing races for 2 years. So just
see, that's fascinating to me. Yeah, because you hear like most race directors have that sort of path where maybe they start with the single event or a couple of shorter events, and then they gradually increase their resume, and now they have, you know, a whole series of events and stuff like that on their calendar. But knowing your story and knowing this sort of transition, it was smaller events, but then 200. What was the first 200 that you designed, and did you know it was even possible at that point?
Yes, I knew it was possible. I just wasn't sure how it was going to all come together, and I worried all year about it. But I created the Tahoe 200. That was the first one, and it was sort of a natural thing to do. It was, well, how far is it going to be to make a route that goes around the lake? It ended up being roughly 200 miles. So I thought, well, it's a 200 miler. It's a Tahoe 200, something sort of catchy. And I didn't think at that point, like 200 was going to be a thing, because there's multi-loop courses and stuff like that out there. Right. But there was so much interest that first year when I put it out there. People freaked out. They were like, oh, this is like an adventure race, you know, I want to do. And I had almost 200 people try to get in to a race where I can only take like 90 runners. Wow. And I thought, this is interesting. Like maybe this is a thing. And it sort of evolved from there. I started coming up with other routes, and now I have 3 of them, which is a lot to organize, honestly.
We have had guests who have run your races, won your races. Like we had Andy Pearson almost right after he finished the Bigfoot 200 this year.
Hours
after he finished, he got on our show, and it was just, you could just see just like, I don't know where I am. You know, we had Courtney Dauwalter on our show too, and it's interesting to hear them all talk about these events in ways that are, it's different than 100. It's totally approachable and doable from many perspectives. It's fascinating. I love it. Sorry, Kim has a question.
And we have a ton of questions about the 200-mile distance here. Great question from Tobias in the chat room. Tobias asked, Candice, how much experience does one need to run a 200-miler? What percentage of 200-mile finishers have never finished 100?
Ooh, I should probably do a poll and find that out. But I could say off the top of my head, I have a reasonable idea of what we have. We certainly have people who will come in and just hike the whole thing, and just do it as more of a 50-mile a day kind of thing. And at that level, you can come in with very little experience. I don't necessarily recommend that unless you've done like the PCT or, you know, like a lot of hiking. But for like the winners, they're usually a lot more seasoned ultra runners who have done a lot of stuff. We've had people who've only raced like half marathon or 50K as like their longest race ever, and then they come in and finish it, but they're usually a little beat up at the end. So I think there's a smart progression to make, but I do think our cutoffs allow a whole range of competitiveness, so to speak, like somebody who wants to run it as a tour, or somebody who wants to run it like Courtney Dauwalter, and she's just gonna see how fast she can go and do it in 2 days. It's crazy.
It's bonkers to see the times that people were pulling in at Tahoe. 49 hours, just over, like that's 2 back-to-back hundreds in 24 hours. Like that's crazy.
Right.
Let alone the next 50 hours had like so many people crossing the finish line too. So it's not just, hey, everyone finishes within a 10-hour period or something like a normal 100. It's 50 hours. So let's talk about logistics here, because this is something I'm fascinated by. Not only you, but I know you have a team. You come up with these courses, getting aid stations and manning these aid stations and the volunteers. How does that compare for a 200 to the other events that you also race direct? Because you don't just do 200s, you have all sorts of distances, 50 mile, 50Ks, everything. Yeah. So how do those efforts compare to like a regular race director effort of like a smaller series of races?
it's almost exponential, the amount of work we have to do, I think, to get enough volunteers. And so we try to give some incentives as well. But, I think about this a lot. I'm like, if we only had one 200 miler, it'd be so easy to get enough volunteers. But then we have August, September, October. And so you exhaust like this core group of people who want to help you out. And then you have to keep reaching out into the local communities. And so we really have started to build a community around each of the 200s. So we have the one in Tahoe and the whole Tahoe, Reno, Sacramento, Bay Area community, and getting involved in that, giving back to it. So we're not just out there trying to get volunteers, taking. And then in Washington State, the Seattle area and Eastern Washington. And being from Washington, I think it's easier to get people in that area, but there's not as many large cities near the Bigfoot course. Right. And then in Utah, it's definitely been a little bit harder not being from there to go in and reach out Salt Lake City. And Moab's really like 5 hours from Salt Lake City. So you have that in Grand Junction. And so I hire people who work for me all year round, and they do outreach. And we have a scholarship associated with the Moab 240. So we have ways of giving back. So we're not just trying to take, and we want to build something within the community, trail work, all that kind of stuff.
I'm also really fascinated. You've been fairly outspoken regarding trail safety, making sure that your runners are safe, the course markings are good, that whole conversation. What efforts do you make to make sure your runners are safe? If someone signs up for a 200 that maybe doesn't have that level of experience, or like you said, maybe they've only run a 50K or that sort of thing, how much hand-holding do you as a race director have to do, or do you do these speeches, or are there waivers, or like, how does that work?
Well, I take a very front seat approach to runner safety and runner tracking, and I think we're on the front of sort of where races could go with this, although it is expensive to do. But we have spot trackers on all the runners, and that's not perfect. Sometimes they don't work, and it's so frustrating. And so in and out times from the aid stations, we have ham radios at those aid stations, and they're calling in to the headquarters. And then you have the spot devices, and I hire an employee to watch that live tracking map carefully, because it's not just about saying, oh, this person's off course. There's also, has this person been sitting in one spot for too long? Because that can be an indication of a problem. And in a remote area, they can't just call their mom and say, hey, I need the race to come get me. I can't move. My leg's broken. And so we definitely watch for people off course, but it's harder when it's we're talking 100, 112 hour races. If somebody sits in one spot for 5 hours, are they sleeping, or is there a problem? And so it's really important to have people working on that and managing and watching all those maps. So we do a lot of that, and we have to train people for each of the races on that. So we make sure, and then we also make sure before every aid station closes that every runner has been accounted for. So you have to go through every single station, the whole 200 miles, and make sure that's the case the whole way through. Otherwise, you can lose somebody out on a course, and races have. Right. It's definitely possible.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things that as racers, we take a lot of that for granted. We take a lot of that. I'm in this safety corridor. This race is created for me, so I'm safe. I'm in good hands. The reality is, we saw it in multiple races this year where someone took a wrong turn, or they missed a flagging, or something. Yeah. It's very easy.
And there's somebody in the chat room that was mentioning hearing the story of you stumbling upon a runner that was lost from a separate race.
Yeah. So do you? I don't know if you've ever run into any of that sort of thing with any of your races, but does it worry you, I guess, when you have these events like 200-mile events where they're out, runners are out there?
It does. Yeah. It's a huge issue, and runners assume they're going to be safe and somebody's going to be looking for them. But the problem arises when you have a race, and I think it's actually more likely to happen in a race that isn't as worried about it as we are with a 200, because we're sort of more on top of it, because we do recognize it's so remote and the distances are so big and it's so massive. But then you get a race like a 50K or something like that, and they think, oh, the runner, well, they probably just went home. They're not still out on course, and then that runner has to spend the night. They don't have the kind of gear that a 200-mile runner has, and so And the whole incident that you're talking about too, I got a lot of flack for. I think because I was a race director, if I had been a runner out on the trail and I had made a judgment on what happened to that runner, it wouldn't have been as bad. But it ended up blowing up at me a little bit because I think people saw it as me judging their business. And really, I just want to make sure that everybody's being safe and they're tracking their runners. And yeah, and that's just what it comes down to. I think also because I hold it so important to myself that to see something maybe not being done the way I would do it, it's hard.
Well, I mean, I know, as someone who's run dozens of ultras of all distances for years now, I remember when I first started, I would take it for granted because a lot of the races I would do were either in fairly, like the North Face in Marin. If you get lost in Marin, you're going to have a higher mortgage. Like if you get off course, you're going to have a bigger mansion to pay for.
Yeah.
Whereas up here, if you go off course, there's huge stakes. And I think as I've gotten more in ultra, I realized like I need to be sufficient. I can't depend on like if I run a 50K, I know that I need to know the area, the maps, whether it's on my watch or whatever. So I understand that, and I can understand how as a race director, it's probably like that, even to the nth degree, the concern for your runners and also other events and stuff like that. I do want to talk about Teanaway because you got to participate. This is really cool to witness. I've seen you run a number of ultras. Kim and I saw you at Hurt a couple years ago. We've seen you run a lot, but it was really cool to see you at Teanaway. We'll talk about it in a minute.
You're very
because I'm like so excited to talk about Teanaway because Candice crushed it, and it was really neat to see how Candice approaches an event like that from a running perspective. I was a spectator and she was running. But we'll talk about that in a second. We got live questions, so let's get to one of those, and then we'll start talking about FKTs and stuff. Come on,
we have so much to talk about.
So much to cover in the under an hour.
Question from Nathaniel. Nathaniel asks, directing a 200-mile race must attract a passionate crowd. What's the most unique thing that you've seen directing these races?
Yes, it does. And everybody has their own story. That's the thing that really fascinates me. I think that in ultras in general, people have a story, but in 200s, you stick around to hear it. And that's the difference between, a 50 mile, 100 mile and a 200. And it sets it apart. And you spend all that time with people out on the trail, like the other runners. I've seen like what I imagine will be lifetime friendships made and all that's really exciting. But I'm trying to think, there's just so many stories out there. One of our runners, he was in Iraq and he basically just was like an American hero. He like ran out and like saved all of his troops and, just like the courage. And I can't recall the story entirely, but he's like in Wikipedia and stuff. And you would never know this about some of the runners, but they have these backgrounds that any one of them could be on your show. And you would probably have a million things to talk about with them. But yeah, I think it takes a different mindset, a different kind of human to want to do something like that and to have that desire and that drive. And so I just have to say there's so many, I can't even begin to share the stories.
Just being in this sport for a decade or so and learning, you hear a lot from the front of the pack. You hear a lot of these stories of the people who are doing these incredible things. Courtney Dauwalter is a perfect example. Like she's just crushing these races, like absolutely winning everyone outright. And it's an amazing feat. There's also 100 stories behind her, these individuals who, even if they're the last person across that finish line, they have a unique and important story. That's been the number one most fascinating thing for me as a storyteller and filmmaker in this sport is that the amount of stories is endless and the amount of inspiration is mind-blowing. Like everyone has a unique, crazy angle on it. How's it been dealing with the Joe Rogan effect? When we had Courtney Dauwalter on, it was really interesting to kind of hear her perspective because you also have, Cam and that whole crew that love your races and have definitely helped elevate it to a whole new stage. How has that been? Has it been overwhelming or positive?
Really positive, actually. It's interesting because I don't really have any hunting background, but in an interesting twist, my ex, who's my children's dad, he said, "Hey, Cameron Haynes does these trail running events, like 100-milers." I was like, "Who's that?" He said, "Oh, this really famous bow hunter." I was like, "Oh," I looked him up. I was like, "Whoa, he's super famous." So I sent him a message. I'm like, "Hey, you want to run a 200-miler?" And he goes, "Yeah." So next thing I know, we have a professional bow hunter running a 200. And see, this is where we go back to the kind of people that are running these events. They're not necessarily professional runners. They may be professional bow hunters, or we had a professional knife thrower once. So he came out, and it was interesting to see. Joe Rogan would tweet about Cam's run, and then everything would blow up, and there'd be like thousands more followers. And then I think even The Rock tweeted something about Cam finishing. And every time he mentions it on his podcast, I get like 10 messages where it's like, check it out. So it's pretty exciting to see it hit that stage. But I just think it picks people's imagination. It makes them dream a little bit bigger. And 100 miles does that too, I think, even still. I don't think we've ruined it totally. But yeah, the 100 and the 200-mile distance are just really fascinating, I think, to the general population, because they just can't imagine doing it, even though they probably could if they wanted to.
That's it. That's what's really interesting is our sport is niche. For sure it is, even though in our world it doesn't feel like it. Like, even though we're able to, this is our living, this is our job, this is our life. So it's like, oh, this is totally normal. But then you talk about running 100 or even a 200, and people just kind of look at you with that. What? But then they hear the stories, and it's like, holy crap, if that person can do it, or push through those sorts of lows, maybe I can, or maybe there's something else that I can do. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, comment in the chat room from Casey. Wonderful little pixie ninja Casey.
Casey Lichtai.
She says, my coworkers are not runners, and they heard about the Tahoe 200 from Cameron Haynes, and then they did the research on this race. It's so cool how it gets people thinking.
I love it. Like, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I also was unfamiliar with Cameron Haynes. It's only because I don't have a hunting background or anything like that. But to see that sort of wave of PR come to you in your events is like, this is cool when you get guys like Joe Rogan talking about it, and seeing his evolution as a runner has been funny. Like, because years ago he was running in like Champion socks and shoes, and he'd post pictures like, why, what the hell is going on? I just blew through my socks or whatever. And you go, oh, he's gonna learn. And sure enough, a couple months down the road, he's like, I'm wearing Injinjis or whatever, and crushing miles. It's cool to see that evolution on a much
do you think he'll
scale.
Do you think he'll do a 200 or 100 or an ultra ever?
Honestly, yeah, I think so. I think you've already planted the seed. I think Cam has probably planted the seed, and I imagine him doing some sort of ultra at some point. There's no doubt. Yeah. And I'm willing to bet it's going to be one of yours, because you're probably his first connection.
That'd be awesome.
It would be. Awesome. Yeah. I can't imagine the spectacle that would bring along with it, though. Holy crap.
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll probably get more volunteers, which would be nice.
Right.
That's totally, yeah. Get a lot more people exposed.
We have people who'll be like, Cam's running. I wanna be at the aid station. They're like super fans. And the girls will go out with their posters, and like, it's cute. Yeah.
We run into the same thing. That's not true. That's not true. I want to
like our moms, holding posters for us.
Yeah, our moms will.
I bet you guys get recognized all the time.
My voice does, which is
fun.
Yeah. We get a lot of like, oh, you're ginger runner. When I'm running an event, I'll get a lot of people come up from behind and be like, I thought that was your voice. I hear your voice. And I know it's yours. I get a lot of people that say, hey man, I really like your content. And you can tell behind that facade, they're just like, I hate your content. But they just want to say something. It's really, really fun.
Or they try and like sprint finish race you. That's all.
Oh, yes. They're like, I beat the ginger runner.
Yes, this has happened a lot lately, where I'll be running and I'm enjoying the crap out of my race, and I'm about to finish, and someone will be like, I can't be beat by the ginger runner. And then they'll finish 3 seconds ahead of me, and they'll just like, what's up? I'm like, nothing. Nothing now. One thing that both Kim and I really admire is from time to time, especially in the last couple of years, we've seen you go on adventures and you'll like Facebook update, hey, go on checking out this trail. It's 50 miles long. I'm going to go see if I can do a through hike of it. Those types of things. But most recently, your Wonderland experience. So this is something I have a close connection to this trail. Both Kim and I do. We were there to document Gary's FKT on it. That was our first real experience with it. It is an incredible trail. Beautiful, beautiful region of this state. You just set the unsupported FKT, which I think is mind-blowing that anyone would attempt it unsupported, because it is so big and so long. What drew you to this line? What, especially amidst you race directing 200s and training for Teanaway, like you have all this going on in your life. What drew you to the Wonderland and to attempt the FKT?
The Wonderland Trail is like a spiritual quest I go on every so many years, it seems like. And I like to do it fast. And I sort of realized I had this opportunity since I wasn't course marking for Tahoe. I was staying home a little longer, spending a little more time with the kids. And the kids went back to dad's, and I was like, maybe I just had in my mind that I was going to go do it at some point after it got broken last year. 2 women went out and ran. I had the record in 2012, and I considered it soft. And they came out and broke it again. And so I'd wanted to sort of come back and see how much faster I could do. But I feel like it's just it's one of those places that draws people back because there's so much beauty around the mountain. It's hard to explain if you haven't been there, but every corner you go around and you have this different view and this different experience of the mountain. And that's why circumnavigations, I think, are so much fun. You get to really experience that whole thing. And I guess for me, the solo aspect is always the biggest growth that I get if I go out there and I am sort of just counting on myself. I need to know what I have to bring for myself and if there's an emergency. So I had a lot of stuff that I didn't need, which is great. And I could have used a little more food, which would have been nice. But you don't know. And the pack was heavy enough. So I got all these sandwiches in there. I brought 6 sandwiches and then I couldn't chew them. I was like,
oh God, yeah.
Bad idea. So every time I learned so much too, but I just think the mountain is just so special. Anybody who's spent time in Washington, you look at it all the time, and then you get up and close like that. The rivers are just roaring down it. Yeah, it's amazing. You feel so small.
And did you know you were on FKT pace? Were you keeping track, or was it just you wanted to do a solo strong effort fast, hopefully pulling an FKT at the end, or were you really gunning for it the whole time?
I was going for it, but I wasn't. I was not thinking I was going to. Well, I wanted to sort of see how it felt because I knew I was in good shape. So I thought I could do anything from 25 something all the way up until the other record was 29:12, I believe. Right. And so I thought I might get really close to their record and still barely beat it, or I could get 25 something. I still think 25 is in my range. I just need to go a little harder on the first day. I took it a little too easy, and then push a little more at night. But I ended up doing 28:45, so I got it by like close to 30 minutes, and I was pretty happy with that. But I still was like, just could have gotten another 20. There's always this like growth that I always want to get better. So I guess we're all like that.
I'm
runners.
Assuming then that means you'll attempt it again. It sounds, if it is a pilgrimage
Probably.
for you even if you don't attempt an FKT, you'll definitely be doing Wonderland again.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I even thought about doing it like next week, but it's a lot to take on mentally. And I forget you get out there in like 93, 95 miles. It's a long way, especially when you're just 20 miles in, you're like, oh, got a lot to go. And
I can't imagine. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you go into it and you don't have enough desire for it, it's gonna just be a slog fest. And so when I went into it, I was just like ready, just so excited and pumped. And so I took that through the whole day and the next day, and had a lot of energy left on day 2. So I was able to. That's where I got my half-hour time. I just went faster the last 20, 30 miles.
Yeah, I remember reading in your report that I think you looked at your watch in the last couple, like 20 miles or something, and you're like, I need to run
whatever. Worried.
Yeah, you like, I need to pick this up now. So one thing I really love to talk about with people who have set FKTs, especially something like this, which is so close to a 100-mile effort. It's like 93, and it's still got just under 30,000 feet of gain, right? It's like 28, something like that.
I think it's between 25 and 27.
Oh, somewhere there. Okay.
I seem to get a different number every time I measure it, because I had a handheld Garmin, and I measured it with that, but I had a watch, and then the watch died. So the only thing that measured it was a handheld, and that was close to 26.
Okay. I think I remember that.
Close enough.
Gary's effort. It was a number in the high 20s.
I'll tell you one thing, though. The information online says it's much less climbing than it actually is. I think it says 22,000. No way. No way.
Yeah, I ended up going off of GPX files and stuff like that when I did the movie, because I was like, these numbers don't look right. Like, I think online it says something like 22.3 or something. I was like, this is not accurate.
Yeah.
So taking that effort, taking the FKT, which congratulations, huge, that you were able to get the unsupported FKT back. Comparing that to an effort like Teanaway, where there are aid stations, but it's still, some of them are still pretty far apart and stuff like that. What are you drawn to more? Do you still love the race environment where you have aid stations, or do you like that unsupported, totally solo, push through your own mind and that sort of experience?
I really like both. I think it's nice to have options. Doing a race is wonderful because you have people cheering you on. There's a lot of energy you can get from the crowds and from having your friends. I just went out solo and did Teanaway solo, which was definitely harder than the times I've had crew, because I forgot my headlamp at mile 46 and ended up having to just use this little. It was a big problem the rest of the race. But had I had a crew, they would have brought it to me and it wouldn't have been an issue. So it's nice to do races and see how fast you can really go without all those things that get in your way when you're doing it solo. And so the way that I ran Teanaway was a little more like doing the Wonderland, just because I carried a lot of my stuff. There's only 2 drop bag spots at that race, which is unusual. It's pretty low for a 100-miler. But I like both. I mean, I love races. I love that atmosphere. I'm really looking forward to going back to Hurt, because that's got a lot of energy too. And the loop course is different, totally different. So, yeah. And then just at some point I want to do the whole Arizona Trail. Try to do like a 2-week push for that. So even a little bit longer, but not quite ready for like the PCT. But maybe, but not yet.
I love hearing that. That's kind of exciting. I'm also just curious. We'll get to some live questions here before we start talking about Teanaway specifically. I'm just super curious with all the things that have been going on in your life in the last few months with the race directing, the FKT, the training for a race and stuff. How has that affected, if at all, the FKT attempt or Teanaway? Were your lows significantly lower than you would normally experience in these efforts, or does your body actually handle it really well? And is it like regular life stress helps train your body for these physical stresses?
That's a great question, because it's sort of both. I think there's a lot of disadvantages to being too busy. But on the other hand, I used my experience with lack of sleep that I've had like all summer now, basically from the end of July up till now. We're still like 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. I just use that to be like, you know what, suck it up. You're fine. Like, you'll be fine. You don't need to sleep right now on the trail. And sort of been training my body a little bit in that way. But I do think there'll be a point where I'm going to really have to like catch up on that kind of stuff. But it's for me, it's been these little breaks. So it's almost like going and doing the Wonderland was this break in between these crazy like race directing stints where I got to like have a little time for myself. So because it's like going to the spa, but not really. But for me, getting to go do those adventures is sort of relaxing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I love it.
A little bit.
Let's get to some of these live questions. Kim, you pulled a bunch aside.
Speaking of relaxing, Gus, our dog, is snoring like crazy. So hopefully you guys aren't hearing
the
it.
mic is picking it up ever so softly. If you go back and listen, you might be able to hear Gus snoring. But there's a pretty significant amount of snoring going on in the background from our dog.
Yeah. There's a question from Tim in the chat room, just going back to the Wonderland thing. Tim asked, Candice, can you go through a gear checklist for Wonderland, and how heavy was your pack? So maybe you don't have to do full gear checklist. Maybe like what shoes were you using, poles, etc.
Yeah, I always like to have a rain jacket. So if I'm going solo, I think it's really important to be prepared for really bad weather. And if you break your leg on the trail and you have to sit there and wait for 24 hours or more to get help. So I bring like a rain jacket, a thermal layer for the top, gloves. And then I had like a trucker hat. So otherwise I would have brought a regular like beanie. And then I had a buff, of course, calories, water. So a filter bottle. I ended up just drinking the water from the stream. I was like too big of a hurry to keep filtering it all the time. And then I wore the Ultra Superior 3.5s. They're probably not going to have as much padding as some people would like for a long push like that, but I know how they work with my feet. I'm not going to turn my ankle in them. They don't cause any blisters. Like I didn't have a single blister, not a lost toenail, nothing. And so I would wear like shorts and gingy socks, Ultra shoes. I had an extra shirt in my bag, so I had a shirt on, and then in case I wanted to change it. I probably didn't need that, but had it. So mainly extra clothes, and then I bring my phone for emergencies, but also listen to music, and then I would have a handheld Garmin. I could see all the trails on it. And then I would have a Delorme spot in reach device I could call for an emergency if need be, and a GPS watch. And I had 3 headlamps, because maybe 4, I'm trying to remember, a lot, and extra batteries for all of them. So waist light, because out there alone, you don't want to have to sit it out in the dark. Like people, I can't tell you how many times it's happened to people on the Wonderland Trail trying to get like an FKT or something. If you read stories, it's just that would just be the worst case scenario. So I just bring a lot of that kind of stuff. I don't bring a first aid kit because I figure if there's a problem, a real problem, like I'm going to need a lot more than a first aid kit. So I don't bring anything like that.
Nice. Go ahead.
Yeah.
There's a question in regards to recovery from Connor. Connor asks, what's recovery like for a 200 versus a tough mountain 100?
Good question. It really completely depends on how hard you push. I think that if you're just doing, let's say middle of the pack effort where you're not trying to win, you're not pushing like super, super hard the whole way, for both those types of events, a 200 could potentially be less recovery if you're not pushing too hard, because you just have more time within that 200 to take care of problems that are arising and to get sleep. But if you're pushing harder in a 200 for longer, then recovery could take months. I think generally good recovery for 100 takes about, for racing 100, like for me, would take like a month, but I could probably race another race in 3 weeks. But if you start to back them too close and race too hard, I think you're going to get burnout. And then with a 200, I would say, again, and then it just really depends on the person. You have to know yourself and you have to give yourself that time. A simple equation is 10 miles for every, 1 day for every 10 miles raced. So if you have a 100-mile race, you should take 10 days off completely, just completely off. No running.
I think that's a good, at least a good starter. Yeah, I know that my 100, it took me what I thought was, I was like, oh, a month, I'm ready to go. It actually took longer than that. It took, since it was my first, and there was a lot of deep fatigue that I didn't expect, and I still had stuff coming out like 2 months later where it's just runs weren't going well. But I've heard also people talk about 200s where, because the effort is so much lighter and their training is so much better leading up to it, because they tend to have to do a bunch of big runs just to get into that, that their recovery is much better. You look at people like Vaughn Fahn, who we've had on the show, who run 200s like nobody's business. Like, oh, you got a 200 this weekend? Cool, let's go do it. It's It's like, what?
Well, she did.
Years.
She did Bigfoot,
Cascade.
Tahoe 200, Cascade Crest, Teanaway 100, which was really freaking hard, and not that the 200s weren't, but I can't believe it. And she finished it looking great. It's amazing.
She makes it look like literally a walk in the park.
we call her Vanimal.
Vanimal. You mentioned it. I can't wait to talk about it, so let's do it. Teanaway. Our good friend Brian Morrison, he was the first-time race director, so that's why I'm really excited to have you on the show, because you are a very seasoned race director now doing some of these huge events. For you running this event, did you have your race director vision on, like looking for everything of like, oh, he does things differently, or were you able to just kind of sit back in the passenger seat and just enjoy the ride?
Yeah, I think I go into it to just enjoy the ride. Try not to judge the way. I'm pretty open. Like, we all have our different ways of doing things. I felt like the way he did his race felt a lot like the way that I like to do mine. And so the whole time I was just like, damn, he's doing a good job. I was super impressed. I thought that from the emails he sent all the way through the post-race stuff, it was just really well organized, especially for a first-time event. The reflectors were amazing at night. Course markings were great. I can't even think of a single complaint. But I always worry that race directors are going to worry about me running the race and judging them. But I don't do that. I mean, if multiple aid stations are missing or there's like really big issues, I'll probably say something to them. But I usually prepare. As a runner, I prepare for anything. I always have enough stuff in my pack if an aid station was missing, especially a first year event.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know what? It could happen. I'll just have enough. But other runners, they don't necessarily, new runners don't realize that. I think a lot of times it can happen.
And one thing that I, as a spectator at this event, on crew and pacer as well, it was really cool to see you come through, and you could tell how self-sufficient you were. You would come in, the aid station volunteers would approach you and ask you what you need, and I think you only needed bottles refilled. I don't think you maybe just handpicked snacks and stuff, but you seemed so confident in. I'm taking this from your experience of like Wonderland the week or two before, but
right. You
were just so self-sufficient. It was really neat to see. You also were quoted at the finish line as, to me, I'm quoting you, when you said this was the hardest 100 I'd ever run. How did this race set that apart? And how did you deal with those mental hurdles as you're going through this event? It's like, this is the hardest thing I've ever run. So what made it the hardest, and how did you deal with that?
Well, I think it was the sheer amount of climbing, the technical aspects of the trail, super rocky, got more rocky on the way back, even it's same trail, more rocky, more hilly. But it always happens. I don't know. Brian went out there and he built the hills up a little more. But it's hard to explain. The hills are just so vertical compared to, there's not switchbacks really. A few sections have some switchbacks, but there's just so much just grinding like climbs. And same with going down. I was just really glad I went into it well trained. And I actually think having done the Wonderland Trail helped. I could have probably been a little more rested for it. I think I could have raced a little harder if I'd had an extra week. And I'd finished up organizing the Tahoe 200 on Wednesday. And then I drove out there, packed at my house, and got there on Friday for the race. So I didn't get a lot of sleep. Drove through the night Thursday. So I think that makes it a little hard, but it was definitely, I would say it's probably the hardest, other than Hard Rock. It's got to be the hardest 100 miler, numbers wise and everything, probably in the US right now. If you don't count Barkley, Hard Rock has the altitude. Otherwise I would say it's like Hard Rock, level climbs. And, they were just so steep. It was unbelievable. And the rocks, it's rocks.
I only got to experience about 20 miles of it, and I can attest that everything Candice is saying is accurate. It was quite.
Yeah.
It was quite. I mean, even though my section I think was probably the easier section. It was 20 miles with like.
Which one
60.
did you?
It was from the
What'd you do?
turnaround to Iron Peak 2.
Oh, okay.
So it was basically you climb for 8 miles, you descend for 8 miles, you climb.
Yeah, it's a long way.
It's a long way.
Yeah.
As someone who has probably dealt with their fair share of lows and races and pushed through moments that, you know, you're just questioning, like, why did I sign up for this? Or how am I even going to get this done? At Teanaway, how did you push through those lows? Because I know we have a lot of listeners that are going to encounter lows in their races, whether it's a ultra or beyond or whatever. How do you get through them?
I have done enough of them to know that it's that moment where you think you can't, that allows you to push into like new territory, and to grow as a human being just in general. And so when I start to feel like those lows, I can go back to, okay, I'm entering phase 2, like there's going to be growth. This is good. So I'm able to have like a point of reference and know that pushing through that, like it does get better. And a lot of times you think it's just awful. And then 10 miles later, you're like, da, 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 like everything feels great. So wonderful. So you just have to remember that life changes like emotions, and you'll feel those emotions in the run, and it doesn't, you know, when you actually get in that moment of where you're really at, everything's okay. You know, everything is usually okay, and you just got to keep grinding it. But certainly like a good training plan really helps, being well trained for the specific event you're doing is going to help you mentally to just be ready for it. That's pretty important as well.
And you finished second out of a pretty stout field of ladies, just powerful ladies that just dominated this event. You were also really emotional at the finish. I saw the pictures and know a little bit of that. But what was the reason? Like, what was it about finishing that event and crushing it in second place that got you worked up, a little emotional?
Oh my gosh. I came around that corner and I saw the finish line, and I just couldn't, like, I just started crying. It was crazy. I didn't really expect that to happen. But I think that I had gone so deep in that race, like into such depths, and like just kept going and come back out. And I had done it with Tim Stroh, who organizes the Plane 100. He and I ran together for a long time. And so it was just like this emergence back into the world. And it was just joyful to get back and see all these people, and, you know, sad to be done, but glad, very glad. I think I feel ultras bring out a lot of emotion in me in general, at finish lines especially. Like when I have runners come through the 200-mile finish line, little tears coming down, you know, wear the sunglasses. So I just think that when you get that full journey and you really go through it and you get through the hard times, sometimes you do get those tears of joy at the finish. I DNF'd hurt in January, which was tough. And I feel like I just was weak mentally. I wasn't ready for it. And then I DNF'd the TRT 100 in July. So I came into this like, not gonna DNF. So there was that kind of like, all right, I still got it. I can finish these things feeling, even though I'd finished the Wonderland. It was like nice to just get through 100 and be successful.
And you were very successful. Second place female at the inaugural Teanaway Country 100, which every person that crossed that, I think there was one person that crossed the finish line was like, oh, that was really fun. Like one person was like, that was really great, Brian. Obviously everyone loved it, but most of the pain, or the faces coming across were of pain and suffering and like, oh, Brian, what did you do? So congratulations, Candice. What an awesome, awesome finish. It was really cool to watch too. Just watch you just crush it through the aid stations, and it was like you made it look easy, and that's what's testament to your ability, is making something like that look easy. Let's get to maybe one more live question, and then we'll move straight into the post show with Candice Burt.
Yeah, Sean in the chat room just had a question in regards to food and fuel. What were you using for the Wonderland besides sandwiches, or was it just sandwiches? And same at Teanaway.
Wonderland, I used, I had a lot of Laura bars, and I had the 6 peanut butter and honey sandwiches. I swear, like, I don't know where the honey went, but it was just like peanut butter. So let's see what else. I also love bringing like some of the Mirror Energy for like the quicker fix. I run for them as well. So I had probably like, thinking like 8 of those, not a whole lot. I feel like gels on a solo mission like that are just going to be a little heavy to carry for the calorie count usually. But yeah, it was just basically Laura bars and sandwiches, not much variety.
That's impressive.
I was happy to go eat real food afterward. Yeah. Well, when I'm racing, I feel like eating is a job. It's not like, I'm doing this for pleasure. I am just getting the calories in however I have to and not enjoying it because I lose all saliva. It's like everything tastes gross. I'm just it's like a pure focus.
Every time I hear someone mention like real food as their fuel source, and especially like sandwiches and stuff, I'm like, I can't even imagine, especially with like nut butters because they can get really thick.
Yeah.
I'm just like, I can't even imagine for over a day, eating a sandwich every hour of the. So I can imagine it takes that extra effort.
Oh yeah, it's like 10 minutes. Get one bite down. So gross.
Candice, we cannot thank you enough for being on the show. I feel like there's so many additional questions that I have and stuff that we can talk about. We have lots of live questions that we did not get to. Of course, we will get to as many of those in the post show as possible. We like to just kind of rip through a lot of those live questions. We'll talk gear. There was questions about, would you do the FKT again and all that sort of stuff. Are you going to go to Europe and Australia? All sorts of questions that we'll answer in the post show. But since this is Candice's first time on
I can't
Ginger
believe
Runner,
this is Candice's first time on the show.
229 episodes is all it took to get Candice Burt.
We had to get into the 200s. That's my number.
We should have
How fitting.
How fitting. Perfect. And
should have
technically
been 200, but that's okay.
Well, knowing your races, not all your races are 200 miles. In fact, most of them are 200 plus, right?
True. Yeah.
So we're at
there is 238 is Moab.
So. So this is technically the 200th episode with Candice. It's just 229. We just added a couple extra episodes in there. Regardless, so Candice, what we do with our first time guests, it's very easy. It's called the Quickie Question Quiz. It's a series of, I haven't even counted them ever. I think it's 10 questions. They're very easy. You just answer with the first thing that comes to your head. Give me the thumbs up when you're ready to go, and we'll just rip on through. What was your very first race?
The Seattle Marathon.
Oh, it's coming up. Favorite place to run?
Yeah. At home. I would say at home. It's nice to have that relaxation.
Road or trails?
Trails, always.
Bucket list race?
Actually doing it this spring. It's a brand new 200 miler in Australia. It's called the West something. I'll figure out what it's called by spring. But there's a point-to-point 200 miler there.
That's pretty awesome. Favorite running movie?
Oh, I can't even think of one. Pre, maybe? Yeah, that's the only one that comes to mind.
Guilty pleasure TV show?
I just totally splurged on Ozark. I love that show.
We just did that.
Season 2.
We just did that too.
So good.
Favorite pre-race meal?
I love to have either sushi or the night before or steak medium rare.
Favorite post-race indulgence? What's the first thing that you devoured after Teanaway?
Well, that's gross if I tell you that.
Now I really want to know.
Well, okay. So there was this little, I was so hungry because I didn't have any snacks in my car and I just been eating these nasty sandwiches. And I drove up and there's this little convenience store that has like a hot area. And it was the evening, but they still had breakfast sandwiches, which I got half off. So I had one of those. It was not very good. It was not very good.
I was going to say, like, in my mind, I'm going, oh, God, that sounds awful. But I feel like after running that sort of event, anything will do. Like, all the calories in the world and make it greasy. The final question, what are your current running kicks?
Well, I almost entirely wear the Ultra Superior shoes. Currently wearing the Olympuses, like right this moment.
Nice. Candice, you passed.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Yay.
So remind our viewers where they can find you on social media and where can they register for your events and find out about all of your races that you host?
On social media, on like Instagram, that's probably where I post the most. I'm Run Candice Run, and Twitter, it's just Run Candice. I have a website where I write about my adventures. That's called wilddefined.com. And then for the races, if you want to find any of the races, you could just go. Oh, there's a train again.
Yep.
You hear that?
Yeah.
Oh wait.
It's just rolling right through the back of the train.
There it goes.
I have a train that goes by my house like that too. I've gotten used to it, but this is even closer. So my race website is called, it's destinationtrailrun.com. So destinationtrailrun.com. You'll find all the races. That'll have links to the 200 mile sites are separate. They're sort of their own thing. And yeah, that should cover it.
Awesome. Again, it's awesome to have Candice Burt finally on the show. She's going to stick around for just a few more minutes. We're not going to keep her too much longer for the post show. The post show is for all of our Patreon supporters. If you are a Patreon supporter, we'll see you guys there in just a couple of seconds. If you are not, consider it. It's as little as $1 a month. It supports us through all levels there. And we also have some special head wraps that we tossed up online last week. Of course, we've talked about them on the show and on social media. Our pup, we had to do 3 surgeries over the last couple of months because he had cancer. He's doing very, very well now. He was snoring down on the floor. But to help cover the cost of the surgeries, we made these really cool head wraps. You can get them at gingerrunnerstore.com. And if you're a Patreon supporter, you get discounts and stuff like that too. So that's another reason to go to patreon.com/thegingerrunner to join us. But we are going to go right into the post show.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to episode number 229 of Ginger Runner Live with Candice Burt. What an awesome show.
Thanks, Candice.
Thank you so much, Candice. Very much appreciated.
Thank you guys.
You got it.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And that's it for tonight's show. We'll see you guys next week. Get out there, train hard, race harder, and part of the hardest. I know I am. We'll see you in the post show. All right. Bye. Ginger.